There were occasions too at one time before they closed.
I'd like to call to order this April 7th Policy Board meeting of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody enjoying this soft summer rain or spring rain, Robert?
Yep.
I know you're looking forward to the thunderstorms this afternoon, right? Yeah. Before we go into our agenda today, is there anything board members would like to share with this body before we get started? You'll have another opportunity at the end of the meeting, but I think we'll have time for any comments that you may have that you'd like to share with us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Winslow.
Just on behalf of Chesterfield County, I just want to thank everyone for coming together with the passing of Officer Trey Sutton. It was a real strong regional moment yesterday.
Yes.
As we all came together to acknowledge his passing and the effect that all of this has had on his family and his fiance. And it was just it was sad, but it was also special and a sign of what one person called unconditional love. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Winslow. Anybody else would like to share this morning?
Good to see you, Frank.
Does it have to be transportation? I guess not, transportation. I wanted to recognize Randolph-Macon's basketball team that won the Division III National Championship and brought a lot of honor to the region.
Yes, indeed. We're all proud in the region of what they were able to accomplish, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. This morning, well, first, Mr. Parsons, who's going to be filling in as our clerk this morning, you're going to be impressed with all the many hats he wears for this meeting today. Because he's going to be multitasking. He's filling in for Ms. Firestone, who can't be with us this morning because she has something that requires her attention elsewhere. Ms. Parsons, would you like to make an introduction this morning?
Yes, I would. As I believe we announced at the CBTA meeting, Jennifer DeBrule has taken a new role at DRPT as acting director of DRPT, and because of that change, we're now happy to welcome Tiffany Dubinsky as our DRPT representative on the TPO. So welcome, Tiffany.
Welcome. Thank you so much. No, it's my pleasure to come back as your primary representative for DRPT. We'll still have the same level of engagement, but as you know, the transition with Jennifer as our new acting director means that she now has a bigger set of responsibilities and a lot on her plate. So I'm glad to be able to fill this role for her, and I hope to continue our great working relationship with you all as we've had.
Tiffany, again, welcome, and please give our best to Jennifer. Tell her we'll put her on the prayer list.
I'm sure she'll appreciate that.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Yes, sir. I think we need to do a roll call. So bear with me, please.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart. Mr. Coda. Mr. Carroll.
I'm here for Mr. Carroll and for Mr. Engel today. I don't know that Mr. was on.
Yes, sir. All right. We'll name Mr. Winslow. Mr. Holland.
Here.
Yes. Great. Ms. Lascolette.
Here.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Ms. Pritchard. Ms. O'Bannon. Mr. Thornton.
Yep.
Mr. Brandon. Ms. Page.
Here.
I should know that.
Mr. Chiller and Mr. Evelyn. Mr. Williams.
Here.
Ms. Carmack.
Here.
Mr. Addison.
Here.
Ms. Jordan. Ms. Lynch. Dr. Newville.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Ms. Larson. Ms. Robertson. Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Tim.
Here.
Ms. Adams. Ms. Dean.
Here.
Mr. Mann.
Here.
Mr. Riblett.
Here.
Mr. Martin. Ms. Guthrie. Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Nelson. Mr. Koenig. Ms. Tisdale.
Here.
Ms. Ruffin. Mr. Burnett. Okay, Mr. Chair, I believe that is everyone. If I did leave anyone off, please let me know.
Mr. Clerk, do we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. At this point on the agenda, do I have any motions for any amendments to the agenda that we have today? If not, I will move for approval.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? We need to do a roll call, I believe, don't we?
Aye.
Because we have people attending
Yes, sir.
remote.
We do. All right, we will do a roll call. Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Mr. Winslow. Ms. Lascolette.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Dr. Newville.
Aye.
Ms. Tim.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky.
Aye.
Ms. Tisdale.
Aye.
Greta, was that too fast?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Motion
Clerk.
carries.
Thank you. At this time, I will entertain a motion for approval of the March 3rd, 2022 minutes.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Thornton.
before that's completed, I think there's a correction. I think the name Thornton was absent, but I was present. I'd like for that to be corrected.
Okay, so you are shown in the minutes as being present and you were absent.
No, I was in the minutes as being absent, but I was present.
Oh, I got you, just the reverse. Okay, so that is a motion to amend the minutes. As Mr. Thornton has represented, that needs to be a correction.
Mr. Chair, it looks like Mr. Thornton is counted present.
According to my recollection, it's also present.
Oh, very good.
Okay,
So,
so you withdraw your
I
motion.
withdraw.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thornton. I have a motion for approval of the minutes by Ms. Lascolette. Do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second that. And
We have a
and Frank
second?
is here again.
Somebody write that down.
I have a second from Mr. Holland and an affirmation that Mr. Thornton is sitting next to him for this meeting.
He's here again.
Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Clerk, roll call.
Yes, sir. I would like to note that Ms. Jordan is with us now. We have that recorded. All right, so Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Mr. Winslow.
Aye.
Ms. Lascolette.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Abstain.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
All right,
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
Mr. Addison. Aye. Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
Dr. Newbo,
Aye.
Ms. Tim,
Aye.
Ms. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That moves us to the point on the agenda where we have open public comment. At this time, anybody wishing to come forward and address the body, please give your name and your address. We will allow you 3 minutes. If you represent an organization, we will allow you 5 minutes.
Were you at the risk meeting?
Not seeing anybody here that wishes to speak. Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody raising their hand online?
Mr. Chair, we don't have anyone raising their hand. It looks like there are a couple attendees. I would ask that anybody who is attending virtually and wishes to ask questions of the TPO, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen that can submit questions at that point, and staff will monitor the box and make sure we address those before the end of the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That brings us to the chair's report. As you recall, Ms. Page had made a recommendation to this body that we extend an invitation to the Secretary of Transportation. Mr. Parsons is going to give you a brief update on where we're at on that request.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We are working all the angles that we know of to reach out to the Secretary and make the invitation to attend a future meeting. The direction that we received from the Executive Committee this morning was a recommendation to draft a formal letter to the Secretary to attend our June joint meeting, which I'll provide an update on in just a minute. And that would be more bang for the buck, give the Secretary an opportunity to not just sit with the TPO, but also the CBTA and the Plan RVA Board. So that's what staff is preparing to do with the direction of the chair.
Right, and Mr. Parsons mentioned, our meeting in June. That is going to be a joint meeting with CBTA, Plan RVA, and it goes back to being able to have an opportunity for us to sit down together across these 3 organizations and not only share information about what we do for transportation, but also give the public, the folks in this region, an opportunity to better understand how we work together in being able to do transportation in Central Virginia. So they're going to be following the protocols that we had, the committee that was chaired by Dr. Newbill, that came forward with recommendations that there was consensus on about how we go about advertising and marketing what we do. Those protocols will be followed for this meeting in June. Am I correct, Mr. Parsons?
That's the direction we're headed, yes, sir.
So a lot of good things have come together now over the last 10 months since we started this journey. And you're about to see the fruits of that coming up in June. So I'm very much looking forward to that June meeting with those 3 organizations sitting here at this table. With that, we will now go to the Secretary's report. And again, Mr. Parsons is wearing another hat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the chair did a good job encapsulating the direction we're headed for the annual meeting. We're excited. This is the direct outcome of TPO action and discussion. So staff is going to be working closely with everyone here as well as your staff to make sure that the event comes off without a hitch, and we have a great opportunity to talk about regional collaboration. The current work efforts are included in your packet on page 18. I think the things to highlight, we have a regional bicycle and pedestrian plan that is in its final stages of the adoption process. The public engagement period ended about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and we had really good participation from around the region to provide feedback on that plan, and the final recommended plan is being put together, and we'll be back in front of you, I believe, at the next policy board meeting for review and adoption. Staff continues to work with the CBTA, utilizing a lot of the tools that have been developed by the TPO in the long range plan and other other documents and processes to evaluate projects and their importance to the region. And we're moving now on the CBTA side towards allocating additional regional funds to upcoming and important projects around the region, and that's going to be happening over the next few months as well. So lots of things going on in that regard. I'd be happy to take any other questions on current work efforts. I think the last thing to note under the Secretary's report is on page 20 in your packet is the latest work status and financial report for February 2022. In that regard, everything is fine. We are working towards preparation of the FY23 work program. So many of the work tasks that you see included in the financial report will stick around. We are moving away. We finished the long-range plan in October, and now we're moving into our next major effort is development of a multi-year scenario planning process, which is very exciting, and looking forward to bringing everybody more information on that over the next few months. We're preparing an RFP to be put out on the street to get some consultant help with leading that process and putting together the back end for it. So lots of good news on the horizon in that regard. Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions, but that's the extent of the Secretary's report.
Any questions for Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
just a question relative to the public outreach equity analysis. Mr. Parsons, where are we with that?
I'm sorry, Dr. Newell, can you repeat the question?
Okay, so highlighted in the document you just shared, Table 1, there is a item, public outreach equity analysis, 7210.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to get an update on that.
Sure, that's there were a number of different products that fell under that work task for this year. One was the update to the Title VI plan, which was completed. Right. We have built in some time for this task into each of our planning efforts, like the long range plan and the bike ped update. So I don't think I didn't mean to mislead anyone. There's not an outcome report specifically focused on equity analysis. It's more of an overall agency approach to making sure that is considered in everything we do. So we're continuing to work that angle, and I think that as we move towards the joint meeting, that's the next big milestone is making sure that our outreach efforts tell the story about who we are, and we reach communities that we haven't reached before as much as we can, and that's on the front burner for everything that staff is engaged with right now. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Dr. Newbill. Any other questions for staff, Mr. Parsons? If not, we will roll to new business, and at this time, Mr. Parsons, I believe Mr. Bushing is going to give us a presentation on the draft allocations for the surface transportation, block grants, and Cmac.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Turn it over to Mr. Bushing.
Okay, Mr. Bushing.
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. So this is the FY23 to FY28 allocations for the surface transportation and Cmac programs. So quick overview, selecting projects for these sub-allocated surface transportation and Cmac funds is one of the primary responsibilities of the TPOs. It's one of the main functions. The way our program works, sponsors are able to submit applications for new projects or submit requests for additional funding for projects that have already been selected. And the existing projects are generally prioritized over the new projects. So we make sure we finish what we've already selected before we move on to funding new projects. So a little bit more background information. We received updated budget numbers in the middle of last month for FY23 to 28. It's a significant improvement over where we were last year with all of the COVID cuts. So it's a definite improvement in the financial situation. And I'll go into a little more detail under each program. In your packets, you also have the new project scoring. So this is a summary for each of the projects that were submitted for funding. The approach is what was approved last July by this board. So it's based on the LRTP, follows the same 5 goals and the performance measures that we used in the LRTP. So we're consistent across our planning and our actual funding. And the final score is a benefit cost measure. So for surface transportation, this is the updated budget. So this chart here shows the July 2021 figures, and then below it is the new March 2022. You can see overall it's about a 17.3% increase in available funding. So it's a significant improvement, $21.1 million more than we would have projected would have been available for this year. So the first thing we looked at were the existing project requests. So these were projects that had previously been submitted, and in the fall, the sponsors had submitted an application for additional funds to address shortfalls. So there were 5 projects, 1 in Chesterfield, 1 in Hanover, and 3 in Henrico, for a total of $11.3 million. The costs were generally attributable to increased construction costs, which is just inflation across the board, and then right-of-way acquisition, increasing property values, negotiations with property owners have increased the cost for right-of-way acquisition. So in total, it was $11.3 million. All 5 of these projects are fully funded. The requests are fully met in the draft allocations before you. There were an additional 3 projects that had deficits on them, which were not submitted as applications. Essentially, with each year, VDOT reviews the existing projects before the 6-year program is developed to make sure they have the best estimate, most current estimate. During that process, these additional deficits were identified. So there were 2 in Henrico County and 1 in Goochland County, and it was a total of $14.1 million of deficit. So this was discussed at the TAC meeting last month, and at TAC's direction, staff included all 3 of these projects for full funding as well. I will note the first 2 were reasonably small increases within 20% of the original budget. The 3rd project in Goochland County essentially tripled, so it was at $5 million originally, $5.4 million, and it's now up around $15 million. So it's a significant cost increase on that project. We can provide more information about the project, but it was TAC's recommendation that we fully fund the project. The concern here on pushing back this project, it's been pushed back several times already, and it is scheduled to start in FY23. So if we don't fully fund the project, it can't move forward and get started. So that was the consideration at TAC, and the recommendation was to fully fund the deficit. So when we completed that process, we had 2 projects that had unfunded balances. The first was the Atlee Station road widening in Hanover County. That project, the schedule is actually moved back slightly, so it won't be completed during the FY23 to 28 period. So we were able to do additional funding in FY29, so we moved the funding back to match the new schedule. So no harm to the project, it's just moving the years that funding's provided. The second project is the Mayo Bridge. So this project has evolved over time, I'm sure you're all aware. It was originally a deck maintenance project essentially, and it has evolved now to a superstructure replacement. It's a much bigger project, and VDOT and the city of Richmond are coordinating the revised estimate and the funding strategy for that project. The TPO allocations were left exactly where they were, same dollar amounts, nothing changed on that side, but we didn't address any of the additional deficit that's being worked out separately, apart from the RSTP program. So once we addressed all of the existing projects, there was no funding remaining for any new projects to be selected in the RSTP program. So nothing new was included in the draft allocations. So that's everything for the RSTP program. Mr. Chairman, I can either take questions about that now, or I can go through Cmac and then take questions at the end.
Let's go ahead and take questions now, take them one at a time. Any questions from Mr. Bushing, because I'm gonna have questions myself. Yes, please, sir.
Not so much a question, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's more of a comment related to some of the big investments we're seeing. I had a meeting with the city for the Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Committee, where we are exploring the bridges we're looking to build. Being that we are over the river, we have an opportunity looking at where Pulse, Fall Line Trail, and others intersect north and south over the James River. And the question that I posed before the body is, while we're not fully funded with these projects, I believe we need to consider design elements that address the need for kind of human side interaction with the bridge, meaning pedestrian focused, bicycle focused on all bridges. And I just feel like with all the initiatives that are before this body and the full Plan RVA committee, this multimodal focus, especially in an urban core, I think we need to maybe consider some design elements or requirements and expectations in bridges as we were looking at this big infrastructure investment with money coming from the federal government that will kind of create a standard of what we're looking to expect when we create a bridge over a certain aspect of our connectivity. For me, it's important because these will last, hopefully, a really long time. And the ones we were replacing have lasted for a long time. And I believe that we want to see, in my opinion, more of a design aspect, architectural integrity and beautification of it. I want to have people wanting to stop in the middle of the bridge to take a photo, to enjoy the view, and see what the river looks like. It's protected naturally. It's a great view. And I feel like we all have spots like that. And for me, I just wanted to say with these big projects, I feel like it's an important step to make sure we put those ideas up front as well.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Good comments. If I may, Mr. Mann, can you briefly respond as to VDOT requirements for bridges, bridge enhancements today, and where those requirements come from?
As far as pedestrian accommodations?
Any requirements at all?
That's a pretty open-ended question.
Yeah, how much time we got?
There are a lot of different requirements based on the classification of the road, as far as lane widths, pedestrian accommodations, all those type of things are based on the classification of the road, whether it's arterial, secondary, interstate, whatever it might be, there are different requirements. Short of that, I don't know that I could go into any particulars off the top of my head, but.
So, Mr. Addison, are you saying that, we need, or the locality needs to put forward better requirements addressing the issues that you feel like are important for transportation as it pertains to bridges?
I think considering the investment we're going to be making regionally with public transportation, with BRT expanding regionally, potentially with new buses and frequency, that's an expectation. The Fall Line Trail is creating, I think, a further explanation. And we can modify existing bridges, but we're finding that the way that bridges were designed previously, that's not always an added ability to do. And so as we were looking to replace or modify this, thinking about those steps, I will say, in defense of Secretary here, those plans don't exist nationally either. I try to do some research to find ways that other localities do this as well. I couldn't find a lot of good information. So it's not about us not doing something, it's more about us intentionally thinking ahead about all bridges, in my opinion, should include pedestrian, bike, and bus infrastructure support beyond just cars.
Thank you, sir. Good comments. I have a question for Mr. Bushing. We had a sidebar conversation before this meeting, you and Mr. Parsons and I. And, I told you I was briefly excited, when I got this information about, the surface transportation block funding, and I saw Powhatan scoring really well on a couple of projects. And so my hopes were up that, this was going to carry over into the 6-year allocations. Of course, it didn't. As you pointed out, there was no new money. Everything went to existing construction. Now, my question is going to be both to you and to Mr. Mann, why are we experiencing all of these overruns in terms of our cost estimates? And I think it's more than one reason, but I don't want to step on anything that you're going to share with us because you're the subject matter expert. But we're looking at money going to existing projects and no money for new projects. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to respond to that question about how we find ourselves in that situation, because Mr. Bushing, you pointed out that we got more money this year than we previously thought we were going to be getting, and yet there's no new projects going into the surface transportation block funding. It's only existing. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Where do you want me to go?
Sure, I can start. So, I think there's several elements to the misses. A lot of the ones that we saw today were construction unit costs. So that's just a general inflation across the board. So as the bids come in, when we made the estimate 5 years ago and have revised it even as recently as a year ago, those estimates were not able to predict that we would see the inflation that we're seeing now. So that's a big component of it. So inflated costs, that's across all programs outside of ours as well. VDOT's seeing those as well. I think the other piece on some of this is a transition from a local estimate to a VDOT estimate. On some of these projects, they were originally developed as a locality administered project, and the decision was later made that it would be transferred to VDOT for administration. So then VDOT has to review it and make sure that the estimates were up to their standards, and that resulted in a difference in estimate. And ultimately, I think the intersection project, the Goochland project with the large increase was just a miss. That was a miss on the estimate on the original front end. And we can provide more information about the original estimate, but it was a $5 million estimate and we're at 15, so it is a big gap there. So, and Mr. Mann, I'm happy to leave it to you now.
I think Mr. Bushing explained the immediate cost increase. We're definitely seeing a lot of inflation factors, labor, materials are all going up exponentially. Obviously we don't have a crystal ball, so we've been basing our inflation factors off of history, and there is a lag between when we estimate and when things are bid. It's usually at least a couple months, sometimes more like 6 months from our latest estimate to the bid. And we're just missing across the board. I can tell you at the last letting, I believe 51% of our projects were over our estimate. So even doing our best that we can, we're still missing 50% of the projects that are coming in right now at the VDOT level. And I think, obviously, as Mr. Bush noted, when things switch from local administered to VDOT administered, we are a little more conservative probably on our estimates than the localities are. So there is normally an increase when it moves from a locality to the department. We tend, like I said, to be a little more conservative and make sure that we're covered going forward. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Holland, please.
Having heard that, I just still cannot justify a quadrupling of a project from 5 million to 15 million. Now, I know we've had a pandemic, number one. Number two, I know we've had 7-8% inflation, not prolonged stagflation as we had during the 80s. We had 14% interest rates and inflation was through the roof for a pronounced period of time. But and of course, local versus state. I'm still not satisfied that is satisfactory. I think there's more we need to dig into. More details are needed to justify a quadrupling of a project. Just from my observation, I just do not know.
Thank you, Mr. Holland.
Yeah, I think I would like for you, it was tripling, I think, from 5 to 15 million, but I mean, it's a Goochland project, Hockett Road realignment. We obviously, it's been kicked down the road. We'd like to get it done. But if I were in any of your seats, I'd be saying, like Mr. Holland said, what the heck? Can you explain this? I don't believe this was a original local.
This was not. It's always been not.
I don't believe that element was a factor in this. Can you?
No, we don't have any additional information other than what we were told. Essentially, each year, VDOT's Location and Design Division takes a look at the projects that are going into the 6-year program, and they update the estimate. So based on the new information that's been gathered, since this project is scheduled to start this year, I'm assuming there's a little bit more work taking a look at the project, whereas before it was kind of just sitting in there as here's a placeholder at some point in the future we know we'll need to look at. And I think when they looked at it, it was a lot more work. I can share a sketch of the project if it's at all helpful, so everyone's aware of kind of what this project entails. But essentially 623, it doesn't quite line up where it meets 250. So this is essentially lining the two sections up. So Hockett Road and Ashland Road will line up and meet. So it's an entire new construction of a roadway through essentially a field at this point.
Mr. Parsons, I noticed that during our discussion, the screen didn't change to the members' discussion. Can we make sure that our discussion,
Yes, sir.
instead of leaving the screen, there you go, that's what I wanted. But going back to this thing about the tripling of the cost estimate, I could be real cynical and say, you know, I could submit a project and I could lowball that project, and then I could come back the next year and ask for additional monies, and I'd already be on the books and we would be funding existing projects. Now, I don't think anybody's doing that. Well, Mr. Bush, you were shaking your head up and down.
I like that strategy. Yeah, so moved.
Mr. Bush, you've been warned, you will be challenged, okay? Now you know what you're dealing with. Mr. Winslow has already shown you how this works.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir,
also
Mr. Howell.
further to my comment, I think that this one project, just for the sake of future analysis, demand analysis of when the project commenced, is there a sunk cost currently associated with the project and the timing thereof? And I think that at a minimum is probably needed at this point before we move on. Not to say we shouldn't, however, I think we need to know where we are cost-wise in terms of when did it commence, what has been spent, what's sunk again, and what do we anticipate in terms of timing? Because this could get away from you very easily.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. I have one more comment. But I'll defer to Mr. Parsons first, and then I will make my comments.
If I could follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
From what I was hearing from Mr. Cushing and from that, it sounds like there was a change in some change in scope on that project too. Because apparently the alignment was not considered originally, is that right? Realignment?
No, sir, the project's always been the realignment. It's just an updated estimate that, again, it was just a big miss on the original estimate when it was submitted for funding through the TPO.
Nothing changed.
Mr. Parsons, I believe you had a comment?
I'm going to say it, even though I'm not sure I want to say it. I think one recommendation that the board could take is that staff go back and work with TAC to look at the guidelines and see if there's any safety measures to implement that we could look at future allocations.
Mr. Parsons, that was exactly where I was headed. I was going to task staff with coming back for recommendations to better understand how the different issues have arisen that's causing these overrides, and then come back with recommendations how we can address those different issues that you identify.
Mr. Bushing may be ready to correct me now.
Okay, Mr. Bushing,
Sure. So I can address some of the controls that we have in place now. So this is a project that was selected a while back. So I wasn't here for the original selection of the project. But some of the process that we go through now is when we get the applications, we actually send them to VDOT up front, so we can get a sense of what VDOT's estimate for the project would be and what the applicant's estimate is. So we have some idea of what the risk or what the difference is. Right now, the approach that's in the guidelines is that if it's a locality administered project, we can go with the local estimate. However, that is something that can be revised, and that's something we could take to TAC for further discussion. But that is the approach that was agreed upon during the TAC discussions in reviewing the program last year, and what was adopted in the new guidelines. And there is a chance for the localities to review it, to agree with the changes that VDOT proposes if it goes up, but right now that is the approach that's in place. So.
All right, we're not going to solve this, this morning, but what I do want is, Mr. Bushing, just to comment on your last comment. I'm hearing two different things. I heard originally that we go with, the figures from the locality. Then I'm hearing you say that we go back and check with VDOT, which I would assume we were doing. I just thought that was normal and customary. But then you said, if there are two different figures, then the locality can go forward with their figure versus VDOT. What I want is to identify all those different issues that you feel like might be an issue and how we would better address that issue as it relates to what we've discussed this morning. So do we have consensus that that's something we would like staff to do and bring back to us?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
a question. One of the things that was brought up was going back after a project had been approved for local administration. And I would just say that maybe we want to include that in there as well, because typically when it leaves this building and there's a sign off that it's going to be locally administered, and then there's a circle, that has a very different dynamic. It's kind of, the money goes over, and we've used that to great success in our localities, and I know some others have as well. But respectfully, that might be something you want to consider in addition to the monies. When the project comes back, that's going to change some issues too.
And if I may, one
Yes,
thing.
Mr. Bushing.
Every project that's selected is a VDOT administered project until it receives approval to be locally administered. So we have gone forward with the assumption that the project will be locally administered, but ultimately that is an approval that comes down the road. So when it leaves this building, it's not guaranteed that it will be locally administered.
It's not given by apologies. Right, it's not an authoritative measure from here, but there is an expectation that when that has been settled here, when it comes back, sometimes it doesn't come back here, that is changed from a local administered job, and then you run into some issues.
Correct, yes, sir.
And that could have a nexus to some of the funding. I just think it gives a fuller picture. That's the only thing I'll say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Davis, good point. And Ms. Lascala?
I have a question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
and then
ma'am.
I've got a broader question after that. So my first question is, when do we begin running these projects by VDOT?
When do we run them by VDOT?
When do you said that we're now running them by VDOT, at least to get a sense of the cost of the project.
Yes,
Like,
ma'am.
thoroughly, I understand, but when do we begin doing that? Like last year, 2 years ago, 10 years ago?
As far as I know, it's been in place for 6 or 7 years, and I don't know if it was in place before that, but that's as far back as I've seen the records for. So this has been something we've been doing for a while in terms of validating those estimates.
But it goes, an annual basis. We get an application, those numbers go by VDOT in early fall. Is that correct?
Okay, so.
Yes,
if
ma'am,
don't
you
mind,
have a second question.
Now that leads to another question. So project 105733, the one we're discussing here, then that did get run by VDOT. I think it's only been like 2 years, maybe, that project's, this is not like a project's been there for 15 years. So that VDOT did give us that 5 million cost estimate. Is that what you're saying?
It would have been reviewed, and again, this was before my time here at the TPO, so I don't know exactly what the numbers were, and we can go back and provide that for the board if that's helpful. But I don't, if it was within the past 5 years or so, yes, ma'am, it would have been reviewed by VDOT.
Right. I'm just trying to understand, I mean, it happened, right? I mean, here we are, I mean, we gotta deal with it. But, you know, my emphasis is in how do we prevent this? And I understand cost, you know, right now through the roof, totally get that. But this is not from that. So I'm just trying to understand, how can we put something in place, as, you know, the chairman has said, how can we stop this from happening? Because it's shocking, very shocking.
Mr. Chair.
So if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
I got my staff is feeding me some comments here on the
Oh,
side,
okay,
so
great.
they're the experts, not me on some of this.
Great.
And what I'm hearing is that we do not believe we reviewed this project prior to it coming up to us this time. So we do not believe that we concurred with the 5 million estimate previously.
Well, that's quite different than, okay,
So
well, that explains that.
we can certainly dig in and find out for sure, but that's the answer they're feeding me now.
All right, I'm gonna move on to the Cmac funding, Ms. Bushing. Oh, third question.
Well, I had two, and then he said something, maybe that's the second. So I just want to be clear, looking at the slides today, and looking at what's in our board packet. So our board packet says 5 projects were submitted for additional funding, STBC funding, G funding, totaling 11.3 million. And then we list 8 projects.
Yes, ma'am, there's a second paragraph. I think the formatting is a little weird in there. But there's a second paragraph that was in the middle that talks about this overrun of not being requested.
Okay, so then I'm thinking that's part of that.
Yes, and I
So-
apologize for that.
So the 11.3 million is for which projects?
11.3 million was the request, and I'll pull up the slide. Went through that. So the 11.3 was the original set of requests that we had received. And then there was the additional 14.1, which were the additional deficits that were identified through the normal review process in the spring, but didn't have pending applications.
So today, we're being asked to approve 11.3 or 14.1?
Both. So both sets of funding are included in the draft plan.
So the agenda shows the 11.3, right? So we're doing both today.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. All right, that solves my problem. Now,
Ms. Tim?
I actually have a couple of comments or questions. The first is that when we look at mobility, a lot of times we underserve mobility and pedestrians and bicyclists and transit by the language we use. We talk about transportation alternatives, we talk about road enhancements, and we talk about transit amenities. We have started to change that language into essential infrastructure, and they're not alternatives, but they are primary modes of transportation for many of our citizens and our riders and our pedestrians and bicyclists. And so when we call them enhancements or amenities or alternatives, they can very easily get value engineered out of these projects, and then later when they come back in, increase costs. So I would ask the board to consider, as we look at these projects, to change our language about how we deal with all of our citizens, not just our road riders, drivers. With that said, GRTC did submit an application for bus replacement. We are, as all of you, seriously underfunded and have seriously more needs than we have funding available. I think every single jurisdiction here has come to GRTC asking for service of micromobility or fixed transit. We need more vehicles, we need more service, and we have more priorities than funding. So when I look at that, we put in a request for just the standard replacement of some of our vehicles, and it got scored so lowly as a need that is clearly a priority for every locality. I'd like to know a little bit more about how the scoring is, and I look at some of the road projects as well that got zeros for mobility and accessibility and economic. It makes me wonder what the criteria is and how these are being scored, that a bus could get scored so low. When I look at a place like Hampton Roads, I know we're not Hampton Roads, and they score them so high.
Ms. Parsons, would you like to respond to the question about the scoring, or is that something you would like to get back with Ms. Kim and the body on the scoring of how these projects are? I know we went through this and we agreed on what the criteria were going to be. We had those discussions. But Ms. Tim has raised an issue that calls into question whether or not we got that right. So I don't think, again, we're going to get this resolved this morning, but if there is something that staff could do in the way of responding back to Ms. Tim and this body about the scoring to answer her question, I think that would be beneficial.
Sure.
All right, Mr. Bushin, we're going to get to Cmac, right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So this brings us to the Cmac projects. So for the Cmac budget, same thing, we're seeing an improved financial situation. It's a little bit smaller, so it's 12.7% improvement, about $5.8 million in additional funding beyond what we had expected last year. So the first thing, again, we looked at the existing project requests, and we had 3 projects that had requested additional funding. The first is the Ride Finders program, which is the annual $500,000 for their program. And then the second 2 was Patterson Avenue sidewalks in Henrico and the Route 1 Marina to Marywood section of the Fall Line Trail in Chesterfield. Both of these projects had requested additional funding for deficits. The Patterson Avenue sidewalk was one that was transferred from local administration to VDOT administration, and then the estimate was again updated this spring. So there was actually a bigger deficit than their original request. The original request was $524,000. There was an additional $1.5 million needed after it was reviewed this spring. This plan includes allocations for the full request. This is a fully TPO funded project, so it made sense to address it completely. The other project, the Fall Line Trail segment, Chesterfield had requested $500,000. There's a $1.2 million deficit, which is attributable to having to reroute a portion around a property owner's concerns. So this has a $1.2 million deficit. We had a $500,000 request. We actually had over $700,000 of unmatched Cmac funding. So there was closed outs from old projects where either the state's matching dollars had already been fully expended, or there were older project types that didn't require matching funds for the federal dollars. So to be able to use these, we needed a project that had local money on it. So staff identified this project as a good fit, and we actually were able to use an additional $270,000 of unmatched federal dollars on the project, which will be matched by the locality's contributions towards this $1.2 million deficit. So this was a good match for it, and it was something that needed to be done by this month. So we felt that this was a great fit. And then once we got through the existing projects, we still had additional funding available. So we were in a good place with the Cmac program. So we were able to select 3 new projects this round. The first 2 were proposed for full funding, and the third project is a partial funding. So the locality is picking up the PE and right-of-way phases, and only the construction phase would be funded through the TPO. So the average award for the new projects was $3.55 million. So the projects, the first is the signal system retiming in the city of Richmond. So this is something that's supposed to take place every 3 to 5 years, retiming the signals so they're coordinated, helps traffic to flow better. This covers over 400 intersections in the city of Richmond, so it would do a lot for the entire region as people are commuting in and out of the city. And essentially this would just do a study, code the new signals, and then go out in the field and update it, and then start the process over again, observing, making sure that traffic is flowing well. The second project is the Alverso Roundabout in Chesterfield County. So this is Old Buckingham Road and Alverso Drive. It would replace a 4-way stop intersection with a single lane roundabout. This was originally recommended for funding through Smart Scale last round, but then ultimately was not funded, and it was selected for this round. And then the final project is a very innovative improvement in Hanover County. So this is Creighton Parkway on the top left and Creighton Road on the bottom right, and Walnut Grove. And so these are really essentially an offset intersection, much like we were just talking about with Hockett and Ashland Roads. Rather than rerouting the roads to line up, this proposes an innovative roundabout, which essentially treats this all as one intersection. So there's a lot of delay currently for people waiting to turn left to get over to the other road. And this would eliminate that by putting them all in the same circular roundabout. So those are the 3 projects that are proposed for selection through the Cmac program. So the action that we're requesting today is that the TPO resolves to select those 3 projects for the Cmac program, that the TPO approves the allocations plans for FY23 to 28, which were included in your agenda packets, and that the TPO approves the transfer of previous funds, and there was a table at the bottom of your allocations showing where the funds would go, which would be necessary to complete this allocations plan, and directing staff to take the steps necessary to finalize it, which is coordination with VDOT. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the Cmac or the requested action today.
Any questions for Mr. Bushing, staff, Ms. LaScalette?
Okay, so there are a bunch of questions, all connected. So see if I can do them in order or to make sense. So now, we're being asked today to approve an additional 1.5 million additional that for projects that were already in. Is that right?
There's the 1.5 that was originally requested, and then there's an additional 1.7 that staff identified to help fill the additional needs. So that's the shortfall and the sidewalk project in Henrico, and then the additional 270,000 for the Chesterfield project. So those are beyond the 1.5 that was originally requested.
Okay, so I guess, again, this is probably the way it's written. It says that we're asked to, totaling over 1.5 million, but the request is actually 1.7 million.
No, ma'am, it is just over 1.5 million that was requested. However, with the conversation with TAC and in coordination with VDOT, we identified additional deficits that could be addressed. So much like the RSTP program, there were bigger deficits than what had been requested. And that those are additional 1.7 million beyond the 1.5. So yeah, I apologize for the confusion on how that's written.
The way it's written, so we're being asked, the 1.5 is already approved.
No, ma'am. So we're requesting action on all 3.2. So it's the 1.5 and the 1.7. So it's 3.2 million that are going to existing projects of additional requests.
Okay, and we're back to the same issue, where we have a project that went up 386%, from 524 to 2.024 million. So I think you began to address that a little bit, but this can't be happening to us. I mean, this is 2 today. I mean, I understand, again, prices are up, I get it, but this is not good, this is not good for us. So how do we, what happened here?
So this is one project that went from the local administration to a VDOT administration, and then that was the identified 524,000. That was the original transition from the local estimate to the more conservative VDOT estimate. That was the 524. The additional increase since then was essentially the revised estimates when they looked at current pricing. So that's the spring review again of what, so the 524 was known in the fall. The additional 1.5 million was identified this spring.
So are Cmac projects reviewed by VDOT?
Yes, ma'am. So they both go through the exact same process. Again, I don't know exactly when that all started and when that process began, but it has been going before I started at the TPO 3 years ago.
So this is another one possibly that VDOT did not look at?
No,
We can go back and find that out.
What's the total cost of that project? Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Payne, go ahead.
The total cost of the Patterson Avenue sidewalk project.
2,024,000.
Is that the total cost?
No, sir. That's the deficit. I believe it was
It started at 524, and there, we're being asked to add 1.5 million, for a total of 2,024,000, if my math is right.
I think that's the additional ask. I'm trying to understand what the total project cost is.
Okay, so what is the total project cost?
I believe the original cost was a little over $1 million. And Mr. Ure, maybe you know off the top of your head.
I don't know off the top of my head. It was over $1 million. And it was reviewed by VDOT.
So the original cost was 500,000, but it was really $1 million?
No, ma'am. The 524,000 is the cost increase that we were aware of in the fall. So that was beyond what had originally been approved by this board. There was an additional 524,000 that was needed as the project transferred to VDOT administration and was the estimate was reviewed by VDOT at that time again. Then the additional 1.5 million that's in the motion and in the allocations is, again, VDOT reviewed this spring in light of all the recent inflation and more information that's known about how bids are going. And so that's the total, that 2 million that you just mentioned, that's the total cost increase that we're seeing. And I can pull up, if you have a second, I can pull up what our original allocations for the project were, give you an idea of the total.
Mr. Bush, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. I think Miles, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the process is we receive applications from the member jurisdictions in the fall with requests for whatever the amount is that is needed to advance a project. In this case, it was 524,000.
That was the original estimate.
Was the
Let's go
request.
to the chair,
It's
we're
not,
breaking up into conversations.
the request for funding, it doesn't really matter to us whether that funds the rest of the project or it's a shortfall. It's just what is asked for from the member jurisdiction. So we use that as we weigh the priorities and the ranking of the projects and everything else. Over time, as we've seen today, those requests, those amounts change based on more data, more understanding of what the project needs are going to be. And we are, staff uses the best available information, whether it's from the local jurisdictions, if it's locally administered, if it's VDOT, or if it's a transition between local administration to VDOT administration, to ultimately bring a recommendation to the TAC and then from TAC to this body. So we're functioning the best we can with the numbers that are in front of us, whether that's from a local level or from a VDOT level. We don't have the ability internally at the staff level to vet these numbers. It's usually either from a consultant at the local level or possibly local staff or the VDOT level when it gets to them. And I think that we're trying to understand, as the discussion with RSTP, what are all the different influences that are raising these prices so drastically, and if there's a way to understand as we move forward how to better account for that fluctuation.
Ms. Tim.
Thank you. And I feel for the cost inflation. She's talking about a porch I put on my house and it costs a lot more now than it would have. So I think we're all feeling that personally and professionally. Just to understand the process in general, the project came in this case, it's an Enrico project. There was a certain amount that Enrico is paying for, and they have other funding, and a certain amount they asked the TPO to pay for. And the TPO approved it, said yes. Went to VDOT, VDOT says, it's gonna cost a little bit more. So that was approved, they said yes. And now it's moving forward, and VDOT's coming back and saying it's gonna cost a little bit more, or a lot more. What is the process between whether or not this body absorbs the full increase or cost shares it with CBTA, Enrico, federal infrastructure? Is it just assumed that the STBG or the Cmac would take the full cost of the increase?
I think the answer is it depends. Honestly,
You could be a lawyer.
we're not we're not at the table for all the discussions at the local level. So like you said, there's multiple sources of funding that are at play in different situations depending on the project. And we base our recommendations or our discussions with the TAC. I mean, that's the primary venue and based on what we know.
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, is the request for the additional coming from VDOT or is it coming from the original proponent of the project? I'm just trying to understand the process.
Right. Miles?
Sure, so it comes from the project sponsor. So in this case, Henrico submitted an application in the fall. At the same time that GRTC submitted the application for replacement bus funding, they submitted a request for the additional cost increase for this project. The difference is just that number changed during the 6 months it takes us to process it.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Hogg. Yes, one thing.
Are there any existing projects that came in with overages that you're not recommending go forward and you're not funding? We're just saying, hey, this is an overage that doesn't fit into the plan, we're pulling the project. Are there any existing projects that you're not recommending move forward because of cost overruns?
So not in this review or this year's program. So in the past, we have had these conversations around specific projects. For example, back in January, this board saw the increase on Commerce Road, and the board did not fully fund the request, nor did they meet the full deficit. The city of Richmond picked up a portion of it. So we haven't pulled the projects back, but we've pared back what our portion of the deficit would be. But in general, we haven't pulled back complete projects unless the sponsor has decided they're no longer pursuing it.
So it seems philosophically, we focus on existing projects. And I think we're at risk if that's how this works, we're at risk of what you all talked about at the beginning of this conversation, that by design, this will happen more often.
Mr. Chairman, it's like that,
Mr. Winslow.
it's like that guy who bids $1 on The Price is Right. He gets in under the tent, and then, we approve. And so I think to that point, we do need to look at this. There maybe needs to be some kind of a threshold that says if it goes above a certain percentage of cost increase, we really have to relook at it or something. I don't know what that number is, but.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, just to emphasize the point of local administration, since it kind of came back to that. In this case, I think the system worked as designed. VDOT did fine, and so I think that's a good thing. But because we look at a lot of locally administered things, one of the key components in this specific case was there was I think it was a property diversion. It was a citizen satisfaction, property owner satisfaction that needed to take place. But that also emphasizes, maybe as we start to look at this, Mr. Chair, that when we're looking at locally administered projects, that we have as much information available at the time from the local sponsor, and it's happened to us as well, but you try to get that information as quickly as possible. Then when it goes to VDOT, you don't have a catch or something of that nature. But I do think in this case, the system worked. VDOT caught it, and there was probably some information from the local side that wasn't available at the time when you got in with the property owners and those things. I just want to reemphasize for the record that locally administered projects, we probably need to pay a lot closer attention to those, because there is a little bit of daylight sometimes between the work that's handed off and the packages given from the local sponsor or project sponsor and locally administered projects to VDOT, and try to close some of that gap. There's maybe a little too much daylight, and that's not anybody's fault. It's just maybe a systematic change. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Chairman?
I just wanted to follow up with, I believe, what Mr. Lumpkins was talking about, what's not getting chosen when these are getting chosen, and having staff, when they bring these recommendations forward, also showing us what the opportunity cost is, what we're not choosing when we choose these. Not to say that we shouldn't choose them, but just to have a fuller awareness of what's being deferred back to localities or to other funding sources.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make some closing comments, which are basically going to mirror what I said with the surface transportation program. We've got a problem. We're not going to solve this sitting around this table today. Problem is, we don't seem to have one gatekeeper who's looking at the local estimates and the state estimates. When the project goes forward, we ought to have one gatekeeper signing off on this. And we ought to be considering all the different funding before we put the nose of the camel in the tent and then try to figure out how the rest of the camel is going to come in, or the rest of the money is going to come in. That's not workable, and it's not sustainable. So I'm looking forward to staff going back, taking into consideration all the great comments we had around the table this morning, and be able to come back and do problem identification, and then have recommendations of how we're going to solve these problems that are contributing to what we're seeing right now with these cost overruns. So my next question is, do we have to vote on this today?
Mr. Chair, yes, the recommendation is that it's voted on today, and I would like to clarify, because I don't want anybody to be confused. None of what's coming before you today is a staff recommendation.
I understand.
It's a recommendation from the technical committee, which is members of the
locality
us. At the table.
Which is
Yes,
us,
sir.
our representative. Now, you've heard it said before, all the work gets done in the technical advisory committee. Truer statements were never made. So I would strongly urge you, if you're not hugging your representative on the Technical Advisory Committee, to marry up as soon as possible. And to carry back to to those individuals, your concerns about what we discussed around this table this morning. That said, I will entertain a motion. We have a motion from Mr. Winslow to approve the allocations for the regional surface transportation projects as well as the Cmac projects. Do I have a second on the motion?
Second.
We have a second from Ms. Tim. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Parsons. Excuse me, Mr. Peterson. See, you are carrying more than one role today.
No, just a question. Obviously, we've got a couple of situations today that we're dealing with because it's the way it is. We obviously have had some mistakes in the past. We need to make sure that we don't make them in the future. So I'm ready to support this motion today. But I think we also need to look at, when you've got a project, or if we've got a project, we may allocate funds. But until we actually start expending funds, they can be reconsidered and can be taken off the list if necessary. Once we started and actually process and started expending funds, I think that does make a big difference as to carrying forward. But we have, I'm thinking of the Goochland project, from 5 million to 15 million, but no funds have been expended at this point. Now, not saying that we ought to get rid of it, but we're not, we're pushing this through today. But this is a good example of a case of, if something came in at 5 million, it came back at 15, it's time to relook at that project, not sit there and just automatically move it forward.
I think all of us concur, Mr. Peterson, with your statement. Any other comments on the motion? Ms. LaScalette?
One last thing. It's my understanding that TAC met and they did the surface transportation funding and the Cmac funding in one meeting. Can we confirm that that was all in one meeting? Do we know?
The recommendation was made in one meeting, but this is over a course of many months of discussion.
Because it's my understanding they spent all of their time on the surface transportation funding and spent no time on the Cmac and just approved it.
Well, I would say that in this case, there was considerable more discussion about the RSTBG because of the differential in cost and the consideration of the existing funds. But this goes back to approval of the guidelines last spring. There's been discussion at TAC on an ongoing basis about the application process and the scoring and everything else coming up to the recommendation over the last 9 months or so.
I just wanted to be on record. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Ms. LaScalette. Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Mr. Winslow. Aye. Ms. LaScalette.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
No.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Let it be known, Ms. Jordan is not with us anymore. Dr. Newville.
Aye.
Ms. Tim.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. I'm going to ask that we try to move along. We're running a little bit behind. That moves us to the next item on our agenda, which is the support letters for Henrico County and the City of Richmond.
Yes, sir, I can handle that. Didn't have it noted in the agenda. Starting on page 45 of your packet, there are two letters of support that are requested for endorsement by the authority or by the organization. Both of these are in support of raised grants, which are previously were Tiger grants and are generally going after to secure funding for larger infrastructure projects. The first on page 45 is a letter from Henrico County to replace the Scott Road Bridge over I-95 with a state-of-the-art bicycle pedestrian bridge. And then the second project on page 47 is a application by the city of Richmond to replace the Arthur Ashe Bridge over the CSX transportation bridge on Arthur Ashe. And this provides a critical connection between the city of Richmond and interstates I-95, I-64, and the Bryant Park overlap. So those two letters are included for endorsement by the authority and signature by the chair.
Any questions for staff? Ms. LaScalette?
You need a motion?
Ms. LaScalette, I believe, has a question, and then I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, it's just wording again. The county is applying, this is on the Scott Road Bridge, applying to replace the Scott Road Bridge over I-95 with a state-of-the-art bicycle and pedestrian bridge. So Scott Road Bridge is now a vehicle bridge.
I believe so. I mean,
So it will become only bicycle and pedestrian. That's what this sentence is saying. We're replacing the bridge with a bicycle and pedestrian bridge. I think it's the wording. I don't think that's what we would intend. A bridge that includes the features of or whatever, bicycle and pedestrian.
It's just bike path.
It is just a bike path, so there's no vehicle traffic on this road?
Correct, it'll be a new bridge for vehicles.
Mr. Ure has commented from the audience that this is a new bridge for vehicles.
Okay, so the word replace is in
Excuse
here.
me?
just bicycle.
Just bicycle, I'm sorry.
There'll be a separate bridge for vehicles.
So we're replacing a current bridge with a pedestrian and bicycle bridge.
Mr. Ure, would you like to come up and speak?
I mean, I'm
to
just
this?
saying, that's what it says. That's what I'm asking.
Hold on, we're gonna get an explanation.
Thank you. Yes, this is currently a vehicle bridge with no accommodations for bikes and peds. The proposed bridge that's supported with this letter of support would be just for bikes and pedestrians. There'll be a new vehicular bridge built approximately half a mile to the north.
So what is the new pedestrian and bicycle is replacing what?
A vehicular bridge.
Okay, so we're taking vehicles off that bridge and putting bicycles?
Yes, ma'am.
Because a new bridge will be built for the vehicles.
Would you like to come up, please, and address the table? We're not gonna have a discussion from the audience and around the table. So if you have any comments, please come and the chair will recognize you. Any more questions for staff or Mr. Ure? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve you signing these letters of support.
I have a motion to approve from Mr. Lumpkins. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Peterson. Any more discussion on the motion? Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Howell.
Aye.
Mr. Winslow. Ms. LaScalette.
No.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page.
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Mr. Carmack.
Aye.
Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Dr. Newbill.
Yes, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Newbill. Ms. Tim.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
And Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This brings us to the next item on the agenda. We have a proposed item that amends our bylaws. And the first, excuse me. No, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. We have the safety plan for the region, and I'm going to ask Mr. Parsons to briefly overview that.
Yes, sir. Executive Committee discussed this earlier this morning. It is not an enclosure in the packet itself. There is a link, and we have posted the draft plan on the meeting materials page on the TPO website. This is a first-time look at regional safety trends and indicators, and we're excited about the opportunity for the Richmond region to be a leader in this regard. There are a number of jurisdictions within our nine members that are looking at traffic safety with, I think, to highlight the city of Richmond's efforts in the Vision Zero world. But we are now prepared to adopt a plan that looks at safety issues from a regional perspective. And we have not had a plan of this nature previously, and because of the interest of this body, we established a Vision Zero committee, a work group, probably a year and a half ago, to start looking at the issue, and that work group has met on a regular basis with VDOT and a couple consultant teams to develop this regional safety plan, which is before you today. It provides an overview of regional safety trends and hotspots and areas of possible future focus at a regional scale, and it also provides a snapshot for each of the 9 jurisdictions to highlight areas of concern that each of you may want to consider as you move projects forward, and it will hopefully provide some assistance as decisions need to be made on funding and focus and other efforts at the local level. What we wanted to do today was bring this forward as a first effort into this world to adopt this regional plan, not adopting it as a static plan that is considered the gospel moving forward, but as something that we can continue to build on and provide updates and more information as the data is available. Just as an aside, staff plans on taking the information that's included in the printed plan, which was linked in the packet, and providing more mapping online and data sets as requested by the jurisdictions, so that everyone has this information at your fingertips and is able to use it as your needs arise. We had a discussion earlier at the executive committee about the possibility of incorporating more cross-referencing to state rail plans and issues that have been identified in other realms, and providing those touch points in this in our regional safety plan to efforts that are taking place at the VDOT level, at the DRPT level, and at other venues, so that we can, at least through this avenue, provide the best information we can to everyone that may want to consider it. Mr. Chair, that's
your report.
I'm done.
Mr. Hodges?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the executive committee meeting, we had a good discussion, as Mr. Parsons pointed out. Representing the town, which is somewhat unique in the region, we have 60 trains a day come through. Seems like more, but it's 60 trains a day, and we have 7 intersections. This report, I think, is excellent. It's a good start, and I would support the plan, but it needs to address road and rail interface, not only in the town, obviously, but in, the region. 2 significant issues. One is, as was pointed out, sometimes freight trains stop in the middle of town for hours, and that separates parts of the community from emergency response. We have a school that's within a half a mile of intersection, and it creates issues in that area. The other is, of course, interaction between vehicles and trains. The vehicles always lose, and it's catastrophic. There, in the year 2021, there were 8 collisions, serious collisions, 2 of which involved deaths, and those 2 were in New Kent County. When the chairman is willing to entertain a motion, appreciate Mr. Parsons and his assistance from VDOT. They've provided some documents that would allow me to move for approval and ask for additional review to come back to this committee for consideration for inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Are you making a motion this morning?
Was that a motion?
I'm prepared. I didn't want to jump the gun ahead of any other member comments, but I've drafted one, reviewed it.
Well, I like your motion because it basically says that all of us are going to go back, take a look at the plan, and then we're going to be bringing back any suggestions, recommendations as we move through time. Because this is not something you put up on a shelf. It's a business plan for safety. And so if you would like to make a motion, unless there's some other questions for staff, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, please.
I am in total agreement and support of the comments of Supervisor Hodges. Also, I would, as I stated in the meeting this morning, I would like for us to change the review period and maybe the first year of the transportation plan that we review it and then consider reviewing it every 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Ms. Page.
Yes, sir.
Sean.
On page 58 of this plan, I was trying to see, when I look at, like a collection of data and a plan, I'm wondering what action is there a plan of action? And on page 58, you have the action plan, and first paragraph is about the plan includes action plans for emphasis areas, and it talks about what other MPOs are doing. So I mean, and somebody said this isn't going to sit on a shelf, it's going to be a dynamic document, but I do hope that it leads to something. And if it's supposed to be regional, you look at the next paragraph and it ties into the zero action plan, Vision Zero action plan. And when you link out to that, you go to the Plan RVA website, but it looks like this is primarily what Richmond is doing. I believe Richmond is the only jurisdiction that has adopted the Vision Zero. So I guess, there's a lot of disparate things that need to come together. So I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, to staff and this organization, do you have a plan to implement an action plan?
Plan for a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Lumpkins. That's a great question. I think we knew this going in setting up when this body set up the Vision Zero work group. Everybody is at a different place in terms of comfort levels and, vocabulary in terms of Vision Zero. So we do know that the city of Richmond is kind of leading the way in that effort. But I think if with this plan as a backdrop, we can continue to activate that work group and have these conversations and develop ways to move forward depending on when each jurisdiction is ready to do that. So I think the resource is there as something that everybody can use as a guidebook. And we can be available, staff and local staff can work together to move things forward at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lumpkins. Any other comments or questions for staff?
I just have one quick one.
Ms. Lascolette.
Okay, so there's a technical error on page 30 on the Goochland numbers. Can I just get that to you?
Yes.
It's very minor, thank you.
Okay, are we ready to move forward? Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to adopt the Richmond Regional Transportation Safety Plan as presented with changes with the request that the Transportation Safety Plan Committee and jurisdictions, I would add, review and consider recommended amendments to address safety and railroad intersection concerns included in the study, and this has been recommended that they be cross-referenced. The DC to RVA EIS safety benefits, the VDOT rail grade crossing action plan, and CSX 2017 reported safety recommendations within a year to Ms. Page's comments.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Hodges, and I think a second, I believe that was from Ms. Page. Any further discussion on the motion? Excuse me. Mr. Thornton, I'm sorry. Mr. Thornton, you're the second. My apologies. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Ms. Lascalette.
Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton. Ms. Page.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Carmack. Mr. Addison. Aye. Dr. Newbill.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Newbill. Ms. Tim.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
Aye.
And Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Now we get to the proposed amendments, and the clerk asks, do we have a quorum, Mr. Clerk?
I'm looking at Ms. Ryan to confirm we have 2/3.
Yes, we do. We have 22 votes present, and we need 18 for 2/3 quorum.
Outstanding. No, if we were gonna get over that hurdle. We're there. Okay. Briefly, Chet, and 3 sentences or less. What is the amendment?
Yes, sir. Starting on page 49 in the packet, there is a blue line document outlining the proposed amendment to the bylaws. Section 6 on page 53 is the change, which strikes through language requiring in-person membership. And then starting on page 59, or actually, excuse me, 58, are policy and procedures for the TPO. The additional change there, well, this sets the bylaws in line with Plan RVA so that members are allowed to participate virtually on a limited basis based on personal matters or other medical issues outlined in the policies and procedures. This has not changed over the past few months as we have tried to get to a point where we're situated to take a vote. So this is before us again today for the first reading. Mr. Chair, if the body is in favor, we need a motion to approve, a second, and a 2/3 majority vote. We'll do a roll call vote.
Please, and we have to do this 2 consecutive meetings, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Put it back on the May agenda.
Okay. Folks, you need to be in May, okay? Made progress, we're here, we know, what constitutes a quorum, we know how the voting works across jurisdictions, we're there, let's go forward. Motion, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the bylaw amendments as presented.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We have a tie on the second, so
I will defer to
Dr. Newbill is on second. I think we've had plenty of discussion, but anybody wants to discuss anything more? Good. If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was Mr. Winslow departed?
He's departed, therefore.
Doesn't matter for the vote, but just to make sure. Ms. Lascolette.
It does. Aye.
Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Thornton.
Aye.
Ms. Page.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Carmack. Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Dr. Newbill.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Newbill. Ms. Tim.
Aye.
Ms. Dean.
She's departed.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we have 22 votes aye. Motion
Motion
passed.
carries 2/3.
Good stuff. Well done. Again, please be here at the May meeting, okay?
Yes, sir.
You need transportation to the meeting. I'm kidding. Now we have the agency and committee reports. We have VDOT going first with Mr. Mann, and then we'll have Tiffany report for VD, Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Mr. Mann.
Got a lot of information, but I'll try to be as quick as possible based on the
Blessed are the brief.
CTB at the March meeting had workshop presentations on MAP 21 reliability target setting and preliminary fiscal year 23 to 28 Commonwealth Transportation Fund 6-year financial plan. At the action meeting in March, they approved the fiscal year 22 to 27 6-year improvement program transfers for January through February, and they approved the addition of projects to the 6-year improvement plan for fiscal years 22 to 27. The next CTB meeting workshop is scheduled April 19th, the action meeting on April 20th. Based on the last few months, we do expect that may be consolidated into a one-day meeting. Smart Scale Round 5, the pre-application portal closed April 1st at 5 p.m. Richmond District received 105 pre-applications, which is approximately 22% of the statewide pre-applications. Total statewide was 488. Again, 105 were in Richmond District. The final application period is anticipated to reopen in June and close in early August. As the pre-applications are screened in prior to June, applicants will be notified that they can begin work on the final applications. Any application refinement assistance that's needed is available through VDOT Richmond District Planning. Jake Herman is the contact there. 6-year improvement plan, development of that plan is underway. Richmond District will have a public meeting on Thursday, April 28th. That'll be at the Richmond District Office Complex. The draft 6-year improvement plan will be presented to the CTB in April, and a final 6-year improvement plan will be provided to CTB for action at the June meeting. Fall Line Trail, VDOT has proposed and gotten approval from CBTA to advance 2 design build packages, one in the southern end of the trail, one at the northern end of the trail. VDOT is currently working with the localities and CBTA to create UPCs, program the approved funding, and initiate the necessary agreements. For the design guidelines, there's a stakeholder meeting on April 14th at 2 p.m. to discuss the proposed guidelines. We will be having 2 location public hearings. May 3rd will be at Lewis Ginner Botanical Garden, and May 5th will be at the Hilton Garden Inn in Colonial Heights. Budget updates on Fall Line. The trail did receive $2 million in federal funding that was earmarked for the southernmost portion of the Fall Line. Through that was congressionally directed spending, and we still do not have a state budget, so I don't know any budget updates from the state. And upcoming public meetings, we've already talked about the 6-year plan public hearing Thursday, April 28th at 4 p.m. and the 2 Fall Line location public hearings, May 3rd and May 5th. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Any questions for VDOT? If not, Tiffany, you're on board.
Thank you so much. So I'll just highlight some key points from our agency update this month. First of all, as of yesterday, FT has released the full apportionment tables, so we have now our updated numbers for Section 5303 funding as well as several of our other programs. That will be distributed out to all of our MPOs this afternoon as soon as I get back from this meeting. But we did see a significant increase, about roughly 30% increase in funding. So I believe that will be good news for everyone in terms of our MPOs. We do have our applications open for Section 5303. That will be due May 2nd. And with our online portal back open, that will be an easier process than what we had anticipated. So if there are any questions, you may feel free to reach out to me. Besides that, we've been given updates on HJ 542, our Transit Equity and Modernization Study. We'll be hosting a virtual forum on Thursday, April 21st from 10 to 11 a.m. And our study team will be presenting an update on key findings, spotlighting new tools that we developed to analyze the state of transit throughout the Commonwealth, as well as telling stories from transit riders and sharing our preliminary action ideas. Attendees will be able to learn where the opportunities are as well to improve transit accessibility, infrastructure, electrification, transit technologies, governance, and safety for all Virginians. And then attendance is free and open to the public, and registration information is available on our website at vatransitmodernization.com. And that's in the agency update I'll have for the meeting minutes. Last, I just wanted to highlight there is some available competitive funding from FTA. This is probably more of interest to Julie in this case, but we do highlight that there's availability under our low no emissions program as well as our bus and bus facilities grant programs. Applications are open until May 31st, and from DRPT we are offering letters of support as well as technical assistance to any of our transit agencies or eligible applicants. So we just want to highlight these opportunities that are available to us as a Commonwealth. And besides that, we are still underway with our Rediscover Your Ride initiative. This was the marketing campaign we mentioned last month that launched to try to encourage riders back to transit, especially with everything with the pandemic. So we developed a marketing campaign. There are regional ads that will be running through the middle of May. And then there's also resources for any localities or transit agencies in terms of marketing materials that can be customized for use. So there's a point of contact in the agency update. And besides that, I'm done with my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. Any questions for DRPT? Not seeing any, that we'll move to other business, future meeting topics. Members, is there anything that you'd like to see discussed that we haven't discussed today? Any member comments? This is another chance for you to be able to share what's going on in your community or comment on anything that you heard today.
Well, I just might say I'm very pleased that Chesterfield County Board of Supervisors approved our budget this year prior to the state approving this budget. And I'm also proud to say, as you saw in the paper today, we slashed our vehicle registration fee from $40 to $20, something I've been pursuing now for about 3 years. And so I could share the history of it, but probably time to admit. And I want to thank the agencies for their report. So just a few comments from Chesterfield County.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Please know I'm envious in the situation you find yourself in this morning, having accomplished all those things. Any other comments? If not, our next meeting is May 5th, and again, we have to be here for that amendment, okay?
We're here.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
I'm working.